Hi, this is Sean. Today I'm answering some of the internet's top questions about learning jazz piano. If we haven't met before, my name's Sean. I taught approximately 46,000 one-to-one jazz piano lessons in my time, studied with the great Barry Harris, and now I share what I know on jazzskills.com with members to get them fluent in the language, not just know things from a book and not be able to play, not drown them in information, and actually get them skilled and get them enjoying their music, and some of them to their first jam sessions and gigs and beyond. So join me as we talk about the internet's top questions about learning jazz piano. Number one, how do I start learning jazz piano as a beginner? Fair question. So I'll ask you the question I always used to ask new one-to-ones. I would ask them, who are your top 5 favorite jazz piano players or even jazz players? And I would say that about 80% of people couldn't answer that question. Not because they had so many that they couldn't narrow it down to 5, but because 80 or more percent couldn't name any or couldn't name more than 1 or 2 just because they've heard of them. Now, this might not seem like a big deal. So if you've gone through classical piano lessons, nobody asked you which piano players you could name, right? Because it was all about what's on the page in front of you. But this is a different kind of music. This is a different kind of art form. This is an art form where we compose on the spot. So if you were going to an acting lesson for Hollywood acting and we couldn't have a conversation about, let's say it's Marlon Brando or Al Pacino or Robert De Niro, or even if it's more modern day actors, then something's missing, right? We can't really have a proper conversation about the art form. And when you do learn things, you're not going to recognize them. It's not going to mean anything to you, and you're not going to absorb anything from outside. Now, you might be convinced you don't have any ears and that none of that will make any difference to you anyway, but I can promise you, you won't learn anything about jazz unless you're listening to it. On the same question, I would now technically say, don't get too caught up in the cool shit. People teach and want to learn all the cool sounds. So if I show people that these are chords, they're okay with that. But if somebody else shows somebody that these are chords, then suddenly they want to learn the second thing, right? But unless you have some sort of fundamentals and foundation in your raw ingredients, the rest is just stylistic. And I get person after person on Jazz Skills who spent 5 years, 10 years, 20 years trying to play jazz from all the common advice and have got nowhere until we sit down and find a fun way to work through the fundamentals and not just know them in your head, but get skilled in them so you can speak them as a fluent language. We're going to look at what those fundamentals are as well. I would say jazz books and jazz teachers in general are terrible, well-meaning, but generally terrible at separating style from substance or essentials, and will normally show you what they're doing rather than what you need to know, what you need to be working on at your level. So find a way to work those things. Don't worry, one of the following questions is going to show you what some of those things are. Say that 99% of the information out there is not designed to get you fluent. And there's a big difference between all the stylistic cool shit and what actually gets you fluent. When you work on that, you stand a chance. Have a solid practice method that bridges the gap between knowledge and skills and turns that knowledge into skills. Try and shift that mindset of, I'll understand it first and then I'll do it. Learn by doing, learn by playing until you understand the deeper secrets that the music wants to tell you. Number 2, do I need to learn classical piano first before learning jazz? Great question. I would say no, but that doesn't mean that you don't need to. I didn't. But that doesn't mean that you don't need to learn scales, that you don't need to know chords, that you don't need to have any technique, that you don't need to address your fingering, that you don't need to practice. It doesn't mean you have to get that stuff from classical lessons. In fact, sometimes people who've had classical lessons have an advantage because they have things like scales down and technique down and they've got a facility at the instrument, but they're so fixed in learning from what's in front of them or playing from what's in front of them, often don't have any language skills, so don't know why any of the chords are there, don't know how the melody works, why the whole thing's put together, so they're not playing from the perspective of the composer. So in a way, it can be an advantage not to have gone down that route. In a way, it's a huge advantage. You do not need to go to classical lessons for 10 years before you learn jazz. I didn't do it. Jazz is an advanced language. Of course, you've got to approach it that way, and you do have to have some facility at the instrument. So get things like basic scales and a few chords down, be playing for a while, and then start to work on your jazz. Number 3, what are the essential jazz skills and concepts I need to learn for jazz piano? Scales, you've got to be able to get up and down a scale. You've got to be able to play the chords that are in a scale or in a key. Because all all scales have these. Got to be able to play common progressions that go in them. You've got to be able to play progressions that lead to chords in that scale. So for example, this is D minor 7 in the key of C, because all these chords are in the key of C. And we have this progression, which I teach elsewhere, so I'll link it rather than going over all that ground. But the whole job of that progression, it looks like it's got notes not in the key of C, but its job is to lead to a chord that is. I've seen cases of people learning jazz for many years and not learning those basic fundamentals. So do that. That will get you to a place where you're using the language in a sensible way. And then you can start to think more stylistically. So rather than just playing a chord, basic chord progression, you can start to use some shells in your left hand, some voicings in your right hand, an extra note here and there, some movements, improvisation. And you can start to see how those common chord progressions show up in tune after tune after tune after tune. And that is how you'll learn the language, by relating what you're doing to tunes and seeing that all these core skills are our language, our ABCs. Number 4, I like this one. How important is it to learn music theory for jazz piano? Well, it depends on what you mean. Most of the things out there that are called music theory are not learned at the instrument. All the things we've spoken about already are to be learned at your instrument. So I don't even see them as theory. I just see them as language. I don't recommend buying a big, thick book, reading it and thinking you're going to play jazz. It's crazy. Personally, I would learn the jazz standards, the common jazz tunes that people tend to know. The also gets called the American Songbook. Tunes like Autumn Leaves. Things like Fly Me to the Moon. All those sorts of tunes that you've probably seen and heard of. If not, start on that sort of thing just to listen and get a feel for what they are. So again, I would recommend a method where you're learning at the piano, but be careful of getting guided into stuff that is stylistic and great, but you're struggling so hard to find these great cool sounds that you're not learning anything about the language. You're still speaking English from a phrase book rather than from a true perspective of being able to speak. And finally, do I need to learn to read music to play jazz piano? Interesting one. I barely read a note when I started learning jazz. So definitely not. However, it is helpful to be able to at least read a lead sheet. So if you don't read at all and you want to get into jazz, I would say start with chord symbols that look like this. We'll have some on screen now. And they give you enough data to play things like this. And do you know what? It's okay to just learn a load of tunes from the chords and be an accompanist and be the piano player in the band. In fact, I advocate that. I think it's a great way to get into jazz. But after that, you can either use your ears or start to read simple melodies. So your music will look like this, a single line of melody and chords. And then your playing of it, the more you learn, will become more elaborate. But the more elaborate doesn't come from reading more and more complex stuff. That's a huge misconception. It comes from learning the language. But I'm reading the same lead sheet as you are. So I hope that helps you with some of the top questions asked on the internet about learning jazz piano. I warmly encourage you to love and enjoy this music and enjoy learning it and playing it. If I can help you with that, then come and see us on Jazz Skills, where I'll start you right from the beginning. If you need it, with building chords, learning how they work, getting them from scales, turning them into chord progressions, putting them in exercises to play and practice with tracks, learning your first tunes and your first voicings, which are decorations on the chords to make them more interesting, and going from there into improvisation and chord movements and accompanying and rhythm and all sorts of other stuff. So hope to see you there. Thanks for watching. Hope you got some questions answered. See you on the next one. Bye for now.